Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Deborah McShane and welcome to the DeLand house. Today we're doing a Facebook Live talking about primarily the Woodcook stove. So I'm delighted that you're here. Right now, during the pandemic, we are doing a situation of having research hours over at the Conrad on Wednesday and Saturday. You can call and make an appointment with Sarah. And otherwise, we're doing a number of parlor chats and docent talks, and actually I'm acting as a docent today, and so this fits into that kind of a category. You caught me. I was just in the midst of looking at my very old cookbook here, this Tasahara cookbook. Some of you might be familiar with it. I actually got this in 1972 when I was still living in Hawaii and I was a young student, and began to be interested in the organic movement and the baking of bread. And during that time, I did start baking. Had never done any serious baking prior to this, but this was kind of the Bible for making bread. And it's Edward S.B. Brown. He was with the Zen Center at Tasahara, and it's still available if you'd like to get this book. So this is my vintage piece. So I'll share a little bit of those, couple of other cookbooks with you as we go along. What I'm delighted to talk about today is the Woodcook stove, and I chose to share some information because I actually cooked on a Woodcook stove for 4 years when I was living in Washington from 1974 to 78. Now, the wood cook stove that we have here at the DeLand house is an Allen's Princess. It is not hooked up, unfortunately, and maybe that's a job that we can get George or someone to work on, because actually in the wintertime it wouldn't be bad to have this going when we're having events in here. This is a beautiful cast iron and enamel stove. I would say it's probably from about the 1910 to the 20s. This was a stove that actually was a very modern tool for people here in Florida during the pioneer and early settlement period here in DeLand. In the very, very early days, all they would have done was they would not be cooking in a kitchen. You would have an outdoor kitchen with a hearth and pots up above suspended on a sort of crook, and it was just too dangerous to be cooking inside, and also a lot of times just too hot. So as time went on, they were able to bring these stoves on down via the riverboat and then the railroad, and the house was really lucky to be able to have a Woodcook stove. And actually it wasn't until into the 30s that people began getting electric stoves. So to be able to have a Woodcook stove was wonderful. And of course they would not be doing them during the summertime, working with them during the summertime. So the cook stove actually got its start in the mid-1500s. It was invented in Strasbourg, France. It was improved upon a couple hundred years later by Benjamin Franklin, and he developed what he called the Franklin stove, and it was primarily an insert for fireplaces, and it was a 3-paneled and allowed a lot more heat to be generated and focused. And then from there, up and through into the late 1800s, there were quite a number of manufacturers, and they took from the European model, got kind of fancier and fancier, and to this day, you can actually buy brand new Woodcook stoves anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000. They're extremely efficient and really, really beautiful, and actually still being built essentially on this model. So what we have here is the cast iron top, the enameled body. It sits up off the floor about, say, 8 inches on 4 legs. Here we have it on a big piece of tin or something to protect it in the event that there would be any cinders or something that might fall out when you open the firebox. So I'm going to show you a little bit of the features of the stove. Usually in the left-hand corner here is the firebox, and this is where you're going to load your fire. And a lot of times the stoves could be converted. They could either do coal or wood. So what you would do is, if you had some newsprint or newspaper, crumple it up pretty finely, lay it in the bottom. Then you'd have some kindling, and it's usually best if it's a hardwood kindling. Sarah, I think you have some pieces over there, but I think they're a little small. Anyway, you get a little kindling going, start it up, but first you would have adjusted. Here on the side is a damper, and you'd want to make sure that your damper is open so that you're getting air to underneath the fire, and also there's a chimney damper, and this one is attached through a chimney in the back that will be going up the wall. Typically, a lot of times it's just going to be freestanding up here, but you want to make sure that your chimney damper is open so that you get the draw on the air. So you light it typically with your wood match. Wait till the kindling is burning well, and then you'd have wood, and you usually have a wood box here in the kitchen, and actually we have one here. And I'm going to say, I'll move across here, you know, wood probably about this size. So you make sure your kindling's going well, then you get at least one good log and go ahead and place it in there. Put this back. Now, the best kind of wood to use are any kind of hardwood. Oak is really good, things that'll burn hot and efficiently. Okay, apple wood is also really good, but no softwoods. And also, you want to make sure that the wood was really well dried, probably have about 2 years worth of drying. So you go ahead and you put the wood in, and you'd add actually even another piece or two, as much as would fit in there. And then you have to be kind of one of the slow living people. It's going to probably take about an hour for your oven to get ready. So you have to be able to plan ahead, and maybe you have some other chores that you would be working on. A lot of the newer stoves right now, they have actually a tempered glass that's right here so that you can actually see how your fire is doing. So you want to wait till your temperature is up into, let's say, 375 or something, 350 if you're going to be doing bread. Now, this is actually fairly efficient. You probably would have started your bread even before you started your stove. But we'll talk about this. One of the fun things you might want to, because you're going to wait an hour for the oven to be ready, but you might want to start some coffee or tea. So we have on this stove 6 burners, and right up above the fire bed here is going to be the hottest, of course. Got this handy tool that can lift up your burner, pull it to the side, and then you have a pot that can actually go straight up over, and it sort of fits in there enough. You're usually, the flow of the smoke is it's already started and is going around and back up the chimney. It's usually not a problem of having smoke come out in the room because it's already in flow. But so you have this left-hand side, which is going to remain the hottest, or as you're on your own burner, that you have it up, things that you want to boil quickly, and then you have your slow side. So it's like lesser heat over on the right-hand side. At the DeLand house here, we also have, and many houses had this, they would actually attach a water tank, and so that you could actually use, the heat could go around and water could filtrate through, and you could actually have heated water in here. Another really handy thing in this kind of a cook stove, this is the pre-electrical days, they might want to heat their irons. A hot iron on the stove, you could put it wherever you'd like to, but here it'll be probably warm enough, just on a little side bend. Up here is a warming shelf, and actually there were a lot of these kind of stoves that actually had a whole built-in cupboard up here that would not be as hot as down below, but it's considered the warming oven. But if you finish a dish and you want it to stay warm, you have this warmth coming up through here. So I'm going to show you, here's our oven creaking away. Now, This oven would actually have to be rehabbed before we started really baking it because it's got some sort of heavy rust going on in there. But with the heat flowing around it, it would actually be a fairly even heat. It might be a little bit more here on this side, but there are like fire bricks in there that protect it. So it's not that it's that much hotter on that side, but it's it's a really nice warmth that emanates from this cook stove, and it's a very efficient method of baking bread or cooking meats or any kind of cooking you're wanting to do. It's best to cook on a stove like this. You would be using cast iron, and here's a great old one that was probably really good for cornbread. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about my experience with my own wood cook stove. It was in 1974, and my husband Jerry and I had moved to a little town called Van Zandt, about 90 miles above Seattle, 17 miles out of Bellingham. We bought 20 acres, unimproved land, and we were sort of part of the first sort of back to the land group, and our inspiration had been the Organic Gardening magazine published by the Rodale Press and the Mother Earth News magazine. But it was during that time that people were really starting to consider vulnerability and being able to have access to clean water, being able to grow your own food, free of pesticides, grow your own animals. And so it was quite an adventure. I was 24 at the time that, let's see, 22 at the time that I moved there. So sort of fresh out of college, and I had grown up in the suburbs, so this was all a big adventure for me to move to the country. And we camped out when we first got there. Camped out in a big Sears Coleman tent, and we bought 40 chickens, little baby chicks rather. Started working on a garden space. We had 2 dogs with us, and pretty soon we started building, cleared a space enough to build a cabin. And so we got the cabin up and ready, and we had, we bought a refurbished wood cook stove, and ours was a Monarch stove. And it had actually been, it was a really old stove, but it had been worked on by Stoveworks in the area so that everything was tight and efficient with it. And it was beautiful. Ours didn't have any enamel on it. It had nickel and the cast iron, but it did have a nice warming oven. So I started learning to cook, and I had a friend down the road, Joyce, who helped me, but learned to cook on the cook stove, and it was really a delight. We went for about 9 months without any electricity, but during that time period we had been working on digging a well and bringing electricity in. And when we did get electricity, we still kept working with our wood cook stove. We did invest in an electric frying pan for those necessary quick meals that we wanted. But actually we'd really grown to love being able to work on a wood cook stove, so that was lovely. So a couple things other that I wanted to share that actually started during this time period. I started collecting cookbooks. I had the Tasahara, and this is one that I still use today. It's the Rodale cookbook, and they had a fitness house, and they had a lot of good organic recipes. So that was a favorite cookbook. And then now where I'm living, I live in the James Augustus and Mabel Cox Allen house, and I found this cookbook there. I've become a collector of cookbooks, and this was the Pilot International Cookbook, and there's a couple of neat recipes in here from Mabel Allen, and she has one that is a sort of a sherbet that she makes that's from oranges and grapefruit and lemons, and she has a frozen fruit salad in here too, so that's lovely. And one of my other cookbooks that I love here in DeLand is, it's It's a taste for art. I think this was done in 2009 by the Guild at the Museum of Art DeLand. And this is a great picture by Jackson Walker of Marjorie Kinnon Rawlings with her, she's got a basket of orange fritters there. And she was living up there by Cross Creek. And another thing, so I'm really devoted to the home and the hearth of the home and stoves. Actually, at my house right now, I don't have a Woodcook stove, but I have a 1951 Maytag Dutch oven that's a gas oven that's vintage from the year I was born. And part of my kitchen work is I'm a collector also of aprons, so I was a teacher. That was my profession for most of my career. But I've collected aprons from wherever I've lived or worked, and here's a beautiful little apron from Quetzaltenango in Guatemala. And in these, I think this is really interesting. And I do wear aprons when I'm cooking. Today I'm not really cooking, I'm just speaking. But this is a wonderful apron from Huehuetenango, also. Guatemalan, I mean, it has almost a European look. Here's one of my other very sweet aprons from my background in Hawaii. So it's good to be wearing an apron when you're cooking with a cook stove. Well, I would like to thank everybody for joining us here, and please come on down, join us at the Conrad Center, and for our next parlor chat, which will be with Harlan DeLand, and I believe it's coming up this Saturday at 4:15 in our parlor here. So that'll be Tom Roberts reenacting Harlan DeLand. Well, I'd like to thank you all very much for joining me in the kitchen, and see, I'm able to put my hand on the stove here because we're not fired up. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.